Great.
So,
Welcome, guys.
so
Welcome, Chris. Welcome, Khan. Go ahead, Chris.
cheers. Thank you. So, my name's Chris Ward. I'm here in Connecticut. Been in the company about a year and a half. Responsible for all things marketing and telling the story of a pretty incredible technology, pretty incredible company with its founder, and getting that out there in the U.S. and abroad. Background at General Electric, healthcare and radiology in health IT, and then was with Medtronic, the former Covidian business or U.S. surgical business in surgery prior to that. But saw the device here a year and a half ago before we had unveiled it. It was in stealth mode, stopped me in my career track, stopped me in my footsteps, literally. And like you said, I just had to go work on it and tell the story.
Awesome, awesome. And we have Khan Siddiqui with us as well. So Khan, give us a little bit of a background about yourself. You've been a serial entrepreneur, radiologist, involved in different projects, and then also the Hyperfine that you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'm the Chief Medical Officer and Chief Strategy Officer at Hyperfine. My background is a radiologist, long time ago, practiced at University of Maryland and then Johns Hopkins, and then moved to industry, had a tenure at Microsoft, a tenure at a bunch of startups, and came on board about the same time as Chris did, getting this off the ground.
Awesome, awesome. So tell us a little bit about where this concept for the portable MRI came from. Like, how it was imagined, and then how it actually came to fruition that you could get this technology bundle like this? Like, how did that all happen? What's the story there?
I think the story really started with about 6 years ago now with Jonathan Rothberg, our founder, who really made his name in inventing genome sequencing on a chip. He really focused on things that somebody in his life, somebody loves, has a problem or has an issue with that he's trying to solve. So really started with he wanted to solve, somebody in his family that he loves gets impacted by serial imaging of the head for different reasons. And then the frustration about why do we have to go at a certain place in a certain room to do this? Why can't this happen at the patient's bedside? And that kind of started with this idea that can we take these advanced imaging to the bedside and do over there. So that's kind of started this, he put together a team of very smart engineers and scientists and researchers to see, can you get the scanner to a patient's bedside? And literally the size of the door, width of the door defines how do you do that, right? And the rest of it have to come into play. So there were a lot of fundamental technologies that had to be invented. Number one was like, how do you actually do imaging without Faraday cage? So inventing noise canceling technology to do the stuff. Number two is how do you make sure it's safe in that environment? There's no projectile risk for the magnet. So you had to have a ultra low field scanner that can go through a patient's hospital door so that you don't have projectile risk around this. And then once you have such a low field strength, then how do you actually generate the signal that is diagnostic quality and do the compute for all the signal that is coming into play? So those were the three fundamental technologies that the magnet design, the coil design, and the compute and the noise cancellation are the fundamental reasons why this was even possible.
I see. And so I think that the question on every radiologist and teleradiologist's mind is, what's the image quality look like? And I think we can post some pictures of what I've seen, some images, but just kind of describe, like, compared to like a higher field magnet and a lower field open MRI, like what's the image quality? What does it look like diagnostically?
Yeah, I think I don't think of it as a replacement of a 1.5 or 3 Tesla. I see it more replacement of a non-contrast CT, or you're an MSK radiologist. Like, how many X-rays do you do that have low yield?
Right.
And you wish you'd done an MR on the bed, like think about trauma cases or occult fractures, green stick fractures. They don't show up on X-ray, but they'll show up like a light bulb on a stir image or a T2 type of sequence, right? So it's more about how do you provide a more accurate diagnostic quality at the bedside, at that emergency, and the ICU, where you just cannot do it. So alternate today is do nothing.
Right.
So think of it that way. So it is diagnostic quality from that point of view, right? We do our initial sequences for approved for FDA our neuro sequences, so T1, T2, FLAIR, DWI with ADC maps. We have in-plane resolution of 1.5 millimeters. And that's more than enough for doing anything else. Yeah, they're noisier images than what you will see at 1.5 and 3 Tesla, but they're absolutely way better than a non-contrast portable CT scan that you do in a patient bedside, for example.
Got it. I see. Now, this may be a bit of an ask, but is there any role for contrast at the bedside with this? Can you administer
Absolutely.
contrast? Yeah.
Well, I think the traditional contrast agents probably won't have the enough signal. The gadolinium, Dotrim, and those things will not give us signal at the regular doses. But there are new high reflexivity contrast agents coming out in the market, and there are other type of iron-based contrast agent that will do it. So there's a lot of R&D happening on our side of things to work on those. Nothing FDA cleared yet, but absolutely there will be value. I mean, think of an pre-post-op kind of not intraoperative as much, but more post-op scenarios where you want to immediately image a person to make sure you run the tumor resection before patient goes back down on the floor or in the ICU, and then you're bringing them back in.
Interesting. Yeah, fantastic. And from what I've studied and what I've seen, basically this can be just plugged into the wall, into a 110 outlet, right? How did you guys accomplish that?
So I mean, a lot of proprietary stuff goes in there, but number one is that
all secrets, but just like, what's the concept basically?
Yeah, I mean,
Just to go bedside, right? I mean, you can't have fancy power requirements or anything like that. You need to. It's about access. It's about ubiquity. And so Khan mentioned going through the doorway. You know, the doorways are defined in the clinical environment, and you're not going to budge that. But the same thing, you're not going to reroute power in the walls or shielding or all of that. So to be mobile, it's not just a size and weight issue, but it's like a connectivity issue, literally to the power grid. So it's less than 900 watts of peak power, which is in the coffee pot kind of realm of things. So it's a very electrically efficient machine.
Wow, that's truly amazing. So I know you've kind of deployed it to different sites. I think a few sites around the world. What's been the experience there, and the feedback?
I mean, it's been nonstop, amazing feedback. I think we are over almost 36 sites now deployed in such a short time frame since we got our FDA approval.
Wow.
And it's just making a difference. I mean, like, I remember when one of our sites calls me up and tells me, like, the first time they drove the scanner in the ICU, the nurses gave a standing ovation.
Nice.
Right. So, like, that's like insane. Can you imagine how many technologies you bring in which people are happy to see it and clap as it arriving in the
That's amazing.
patient? But you've been academics and you've been in the health system too, right? I mean, the pains of taking an ICU patient down to radiology to do imaging is just too complicated, too many issues that happen to the patient, and the amount of risk that we put everybody to do that just kind of solves that issue. And especially in this COVID environment where most of these patients in the ICU are COVID positive and you don't want everybody exposed to that, it really makes a difference.
Mm-hmm. And the thought process of having the MRI at the bedside, so is it more kind of like, I know Butterfly just went public, and that's a handheld ultrasound. That's typically a clinician just kind of replacing the stethoscope with the Butterfly, quickly looking, is there an effusion, is there ascites, or something like that. These scans that are performed with the Hyperfine, is the idea that that's going to be uploaded to the PACS and there's going to be a radiologist report that's attached to that, or is it just kind of like a quick look for the ICU doctor? It's a full diagnostic scan and then a report attached to it. Yeah,
that is exactly right. The idea is for it to go to the PACS form, neuroradiology or whoever wants to interpret the images. Obviously, we made it very easy so it can be done very quickly on the bedside, and you can actually make a decision by looking at images on the iPad that is used to drive the scanner locally. But it is designed to go to the PACS for a proper interpretation.
Got it. I see. Fascinating. And the other thing that I read was, I think the cost point was very fascinating. That, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's supposed to be at around the 100,000 mark as a machine. Is that right?
No.
No.
Chris, why don't you go?
Yeah, sure. So we took a bold move for imaging or medical devices. It's all on our website today, publicly available, hyperfine.io. And what you would see on that page is it's $5,000 to $7,000 US dollars per month, which is everything. We don't believe in nickels and dimes.
Oh, subscription-based model. Okay.
Right. So it's a subscription. And that's MRI. So think about that. The service contract on your 15T is typically $100K a year. And you can think about where we're at. We're less than the service contract of a traditional, advanced imaging device. But keep it real simple. No service contract, no additional software charges, no charge for training. One number gets it done. let's make it as easy to own as it is to use to drive access.
That's really truly incredible. So Khan, so what do you think that's going to do to MRI imaging volumes once these start to get out to pretty much everywhere? Like you would think hospitals, imaging centers, clinics, like rural family practice areas, like if it's just a subscription based thing, like I just see that there's going to be a lot more volume of this. Like 3 years from now, there's probably going to be, you know, maybe hundreds of thousands of these get done just because it's so easy, quick, and accessible. But what are your thoughts, Khan?
Yeah, I think my thought is that it needs to answer the right clinical question, right? And it needs to make a difference in patient's life, right? So the use cases that we are focusing on and how we're bringing in all those scenarios you're talking about, right? It really needs to be, our goal is it has to make an outcome impact, right? I mean, just putting scanner for putting scanner, just adding cost to the health system is not what our goal is. Our goal is to be bringing the right use cases to make the right decision at the right time, so that we can actually make a difference in patients' life and physicians who are trying to treat the patients, right? I mean, you've seen stories, right? 90 days wait to get an MR done, and who knows what the hell happened at that time.
Mhm.
I mean, there's so many of these horror stories you think about where you could have done a lot if you immediately had access to imaging aspect of it. So I think of it that way. So will it increase usability? May do, but it'll also reduce cost and reduce inefficiencies in the system that exists because of lack of accessibility of these. I mean, think of it outside the United States, right?
Yeah.
90% of the world doesn't have an MRI scanner, right? I mean, you think about desert countries, that by desert I mean number of scanners per million population.
Yeah.
There's just not enough advanced imaging available. Even look at Canada, right? I mean, Canada, average MR wait time is like in months, 6 months
Yeah.
to do stuff. So when we only look at from the US lens point of view, it looks like, hey, this is going to go increase. But if you look at the global viewpoint of view, then is absolutely needed.
Right. Interesting. Yeah, and what's been the early impact so far in like the developing world? Like I think you deployed one in Pakistan out there, right?
Not yet. So our first scanner is actually getting deployed in Malawi in Africa.
Nice. Okay.
So this is another innovation that we are doing is no training delivery, right?
That's
So
amazing.
nobody from
Next
Hyperfine.
question, like do you need a tech there, or is it simply just plug and play, can anybody, like a minimally trained person, just operate the machine?
Yeah, that's how we've designed it, and we can use it. I think, but you have to really follow what your institution policies are and the state regulations are.
Right.
If state requires whatever they require, you have to follow that for billing and reimbursement purposes. But we've designed it so simple that anybody can use it. So like, again, we had to think through global uses, right? Not just United States uses. So this Malawi scans are getting delivered with nobody from Hyperfine going there, right? So literally it's a company that's delivering it to the hospital. They'll uncrate it, they'll turn it on. We'll be available remotely for any support, but we are confident that this thing's going to work out of the box and make it plug and play. That's how you innovate, right? You innovate on the business model, not just technology, but business model and experience by the customer also. These are the three that really build the blue ocean strategy for any company that is trying to succeed in the space.
That's amazing. Are you making any other radiology technology portable, or is it MRI just for now, or is it, what's the next frontier for you guys?
I think too early to say publicly what we are doing. So, but keep watching us, keep following us.
Always something exciting happening with Khan in the mix. So it's been very interesting following all the stuff that you're doing. So I want to shift gears just a little bit. So Khan, you've been to our reading center and you've seen our teleradiology scribe model in action. Tell me your thoughts before you came to the center, and then when you came to the center with several times with different colleagues, and with Elliot Siegel, he also visited as well. Tell me your thoughts about that, what you thought before, when you saw it, and then after.
So I remember when you first met me and explained what you were doing, and literally a lot of the ideas and workflow enhancement that we used to talk about, and you said you implemented a lot of these stuff and you wanted to show. I mean, I think it was just 6 months you just started when we first talked. And one, I think I really was fascinated till you told me how many scans you're doing per night. And my reaction was impossible, right? 300 scans per night, an 8-hour shift, like that is he's ghost reading or doing something else. I was like, I don't want to do anything with this. I'm not going to go. So I think I think you kept persisting and I kept ignoring you.
That's right. You ignored me for several months. Yeah.
Yeah, till one of, I think till it was Folgan Koshki from Emory called me up, like, I read your article, and he's like, no, this thing is real. You need to go talk to Faisal. I was like, he wanted to talk to you. I was like, let me talk to Faisal first before I make introductions. And I really want to make sure it's real and legit. And then, so you asked me to come on board and have a look at it. And fortunately, it was the same day my wife was also on call. She's a radiologist, so she was doing Telerad from home.
Yeah.
So I showed up in your clinic, and so here's my experience. I'm going to tell you how, how negatively it started, right? So I come in, it's a dingy, dark, like a strip mall. There's only one car in the parking lot, and everything is dark. I enter and it's like, where am I going? And I enter and it says this one room with Chicago Telerad, and it's kind of slightly open, and the room's completely empty. There are like 6 workstations in there, and I was like, he can't be doing 300 cases a day with nobody working.
Nobody's here. Yeah.
And then across the hall, I can hear TV running, right? And you guys are all sitting there having dinner at that time. And I was like, oh, this definitely is a sham.
Yeah.
And, and then you came on, and then, you walked me in, and, you sat down and you walked me through the whole process. And I started looking at it, and I still was like, oh, this is, is this going to be fraud? How's this going to be? What's my responsibility to report Faisal for these purposes? And literally, I was going through these thought process in my head.
Yeah.
And then you started reading the cases, and I'm looking at those cases, and I was like, damn, this is actually pretty good. And in the middle of it, I started timing how long you actually, with my stopwatch on the iPhone, I was timing like how long you're actually spending looking at cases and images and how much you're doing reporting. So I don't know if you noticed or not, but I had my phone constantly. I was kind of doing for every case how you're looking at it.
Yeah, I didn't know.
You're spending significant amount of time, right? And you realize that you were not doing anything that required no acts looking at images, right? It was all just image, report signed, image, report signed, right? You were doing that, and none of the work list, and the thing I really loved was that clinician was calling you and you were talking to them and explaining all the stuff and not rushing through that discussion.
Yeah.
And it really wanted me to, I told you, right, like I want to come back and go back to practice because it really was fun.
Yeah.
And you were like very fresh and thought process. And I come home, here's my wife doing the same thing, and she's already tired. And I start timing her, and I realized that 75% of her time is just not looking at images, is dictating, looking at the report and stuff like that. And it was very obvious that you were spending actually more time looking at images than she was. And it was very obvious that you removed all the inefficiency in practice, create that fatigue, the mental fatigue that you have, and distractions, because you were in the zone, right? Once you're in the zone, then you're very good at looking at stuff, and the constant eye tracking, eye moving away from the images, this gets you out of that zone.
Yeah.
So I think that was fascinating. And obviously I told Folgan that he needs to go talk to you, and then mentioned this to Elliot, and he wanted to come see it. And we spent, I think I've been 3 times now, right? Yeah, twice.
Several times. Yeah, I lost track. I lost track. And so now after, when COVID hit, we couldn't do the whole reading room thing because it was like, we didn't know what was happening. So we had to literally virtualize the whole thing. So basically now we have the same exact thing, except the scribes are working from home. I'm working from home, same concept. So it's about 90% as efficient as being all in the reading room together. But the thing that we gain is that now any radiologist anywhere in the world can work with any of our scribes, who are based all in North America. So yeah, it was, I designed this concept. I had this in my mind, 4 years ago. And the basic thing that kind of led me to this was the whole idea of reading off of one workstation and one dictaphone, just serially processing one case at a time, never made any sense to me, right? It was like, I know the radiologist's mind is so much more powerful than that. You can process stuff parallel. So we had, like what you saw, the 6 workstations, 6 scribes sitting there. So as I'm going through the cases, I'm calling out the findings to the scribes. They're putting it all down. As I get to the 6th workstation, all my reports are populating up. So Since then, Khan, we've had several radiologists who've joined our team who actually work for us. We also have radiologists who don't work for us, who actually use our teleradiology scribe service now, just independents on their own. And they tell me, they share with us, it's like crack cocaine. Like they can't go back to using a dictaphone again. Like once they've started using our scribes. So yeah, it's been an interesting evolution of the workflow. So as you have more scans, you definitely have a place where you can send them to here, because we have more Chicago Telerad radiologists who are coming on board and reading. Yeah, so just tell me, share with me. So once you saw that, once you came into the workflow, you saw everything and whatnot. You mentioned about image time, right? Like how much time my eyes were on the images and how much in terms of report creation. Because when people hear, I read, 400, 500 cases, they think it's impossible, right? Like it still sounds shocking, right? Because if you were to put me, and I'm not a fast radiologist, if you were to put me at a hospital workstation with a dictaphone, I'd probably only good for about 100, 110 cases. What do you think the reason for that is? Why do you think the efficiency goes up so high compared to any other efficiency model in, PACS or RIS?
I think what people, when people measure report turnaround times, they look at the end-to-end turnaround time, right? They don't separate out how much time was spent looking at image versus other things that you do. And I think because I've done eye tracking exercises, research in the past, that's what you use some of that work, right? And we noticed that only 40% of interpretation time is actually spent looking at images, right? You're otherwise looking at buttons and work lists and things like that. So if you just suddenly say that from 40% you've gone up to 80% of the interpretation time is looking at images, you're doubling the time available and looking at your radiology images, right? So it feels like you're reducing time to look at stuff, but you're actually doubling time to look at stuff because you're removing all the unnecessary things that you were doing as part of your workflow. So it's completely opposite. That's why you feel relaxed afterwards and not fatigued.
Yeah, not tired. Yeah.
Because don't feel like you're rushing, even though you're doing so much more work. Yeah. It is much more efficient, and you feel like you literally, when I was watching you do this stuff, I did not think you were rushing at all, right? I mean, and when I was thinking through like how I would interpret images and how much I will scroll through and look at all the window levels, and yeah, like you are even looking at reformats and satchel kernel and all those things, right? It's like, oh, he's not doing any shortcuts there. You're literally doing everything that I would do normally. It's just that you removed all the unnecessary portion of interpretation process, that is generating report and optimizing the work list and sorting those out and dealing with stat cases and this and that. You have somebody else dealing with what the next case you should be reading.
Yeah. The whole idea was to free up the radiologist from all the mundane tasks, like looking at the work list, looking at, looking for priors, all that stuff. So if I have my scribe do all that for me, I can focus all my time on analyzing the images. That's why I'm not tired at the end. I just call up my findings, and then based on my macros that Rhonda already has, she can create my report. So what would you tell radiologists who are looking at this, like a teleradiologist in specific, what advice would you give them if they're considering using our teleradiology scribe service? What would you tell them?
I think they have to definitely try it, right? I mean, again, as you said, it takes time. You can't just do one day and you have the same efficiency as you have, right? But it took you, 6 months to get to the efficiency you're talking about. So I think if you're going this direction, this is a long, it'll take time to scale.
When I first started, it took 6 months, but we have radiologists now who gain the efficiency in about 6 weeks.
That's awesome.
About 4 to 6 weeks, they're like increasing 40, 50%, 100% productivity in about 6 weeks. Yeah.
Yep. I mean, I think I made the same comment to you, right? I mean, it's a fundamentally rethinking how you do the work.
Yeah.
And you'll have the inertia of how I used to do work, right? So again, remember the PACS workflow still is based on film.
Yes.
So literally we read cases as we used to in the 50s, 60s time, right? So fundamentally we haven't changed anything. So you're talking about 100 years of inertia on how you do things, and you have to change that. So I think that, that's fundamentally has to be thought through and changed. I mean, Ellie and I used to talk about, 15, 20 years ago, that why haven't we modified our digital workflows, right? And we are still in looking at images as if we were, looking at films.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to practices, and as I went to Microsoft, things like that, and I would see a magnifying glass next to a PACS workstation. I was like,
Amazing.
why is this sitting here? And then you would have radiologists using magnifying glass on
I've
monitor.
seen
And it's
that
like,
too. Yep.
so it's I think unfortunately we don't spend time teaching people how to be efficient in interpretation process, right? I mean, nobody spends time in residencies and things like that, and people learn whatever inefficient way everybody else has been learning, right? Um, so I think the question becomes that how do you actually take your way of learning and get residents in early stage of the career get familiar with this stuff so that when they're coming out, they're more efficient.
What did you think about the ergonomics also? Because we didn't talk about that, but the theater ergonomics, right? Because the typical radiology monitor is, this big by this big. And again, that's always like, you're always like, zooming in, like getting close. And to me, it's just not big enough. But what do you think about our theater and the ergonomics, the way it was all set up?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many studies showing larger displays provide much better, less eye fatigue, if you want to think of it that way, right? So a lot of the work that we did at Maryland in ergonomic stuff, when I kind of defined those things, right? That the bigger real estate, the easier it is to do image interpretation. It's more relaxing. The thing is, right, I mean, our typical monitor distance is
Mhm.
not natural distance.
Right,
So,
right.
so the reading distance and the far are the two how your eyes are optimized for naturally, right? So the intermediate distance where the monitor's display is actually not a natural place. There's not evolutionary. We were not designed to sit for 8 hours and look at something at that distance.
Right.
So our brains are either trying to look at detail locally, or their visual system, or look at distant stuff far away. And so what you've done is by moving these large displays far away, you're taking advantage of your farsightedness or far sight to where the muscles are relaxed
Yeah.
in the eye, so you feel less fatigued. Whereas you're contracting your lens and you're contracting your muscles to be able to focus. And I mean, there was documented work that we did in eye fatigue work. I think Nabil Safdar did some of this work
Mhm.
also, in which we showed that there was more eye blinking and more visual acuity changes that happen after 8 hours of looking at one place. So, and we always talk about look away for every 20 minutes, look away 20 feet for 20 seconds. You're literally doing that in your normal process, so you
Yeah.
don't get the same fatigue that a typical person would do on a typical computer distance.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, Chris, we've kind of gone a little bit off track of the Hyperfine talk, but I wanted to, have Khan talk a little bit about that. So, but it's been great having you guys on the call. Is there any questions you have for us? Anything you want to learn from us?
I'll go. Like, what changes did you make when you guys went completely virtual?
Yeah, so February last year, when COVID hit, literally our volume just tanked, like they just did everywhere, right? Like practices, like there was no outpatient imaging, whatnot. We had the reading room, and so there's pandemics going, everybody's panicking. We made the decision to shut down the reading room because we didn't want staff coming to the reading room, and we basically just distributed computers to all the staff. Say, okay, we're going to work from home. We're going to figure this out from home. I got all the workstations and brought them to my home. And then we did individual Zoom sessions with each scribe. So I basically recreated the whole theater in my home and then did each workstation as a Zoom session with the scribe. So it took a little bit of imagination, some innovation to make all the workflows, all work. Like it takes us a big difference now is before I would just walk into the reading room, the scribes would have everything set up, all the cases ready to go. Now I have to like start up the whole remote sessions and all that. That takes 15 minutes of work to get that going. Then Rhonda logs in. She oversees all the workstations and all the scribes. And so that's a little bit of a clunkiness thing, but it's a good trade-off to being totally virtual and totally remote. So we are probably at about a 90% as efficient as before. The 10% efficiency comes from me because now I'm like the IT guy too, because I got to do the wiring in the back and all that stuff. Something doesn't work. So it's like me going, so that's where the inefficiency comes up. But the scribes and all that, like they're amazing. Like we're hiring new scribes all the time. I think we have some like 20 scribes now, and that's growing actually quite rapidly. We can basically, take almost anybody and make them into a teleradiology scribe. I think one of our best scribes has been working for us for the past 2 years. She worked at a pet store for 10 years and had no training in medicine, no training in teleradiology or radiology, whatever. And she's one of our best scribes. She's actually a trainer now too. So doing it virtually really helped because now it just opened up, any radiologist anywhere in the world. So we have scribes all over North America and Canada. The whole work at home thing movement has really like helped us to really virtualize everything and make everything really, really efficient. So
I'm just going to speak one thing about the transition to working at home,
yeah,
where before everybody, when you saw the theater, they could all see what was going on and everything like that. So they would know when someone was done with a case and that they would get theirs read. So now I'm the only one who sees everything that's going on.
Yeah.
But so we introduced this little system, very easy, where they just put their name on their little sticky note flag. So he knows they're ready to go. And we've made a great community of kind of networking for our scribes with each other because they're typically pre-med or med school around the country. So now they all have their own little networking system. So it's been pretty cool since COVID, actually.
No, thanks. That's awesome. Faisal, question for you. Like you see ER cases all day long, right? Emergency, like, and you see, where do you see from that context point of view, how do you see Hyperfine, coming into place? Like just think beyond just MR, right? What are the scenarios where even you wish they weren't doing the CT that was non-diagnostic or something like that?
Sometimes like that's a great question actually. So sometimes, you get cases in the ER, like subtle fractures, that sort of thing. Like I know there's a lipohemarthrosis there. We come across this situation all the time. There's a lipohemarthrosis. I know there's a fracture. I just can't see it on the plain film. Even when I compare it to the pediatric on the other side, I think MR would be great to just document that, there's bone marrow edema. And depending on how good the T1 weighted images are for MSK, to actually see that linear low signal and see where that fracture is. I think the sensitivity aspect of the MRI in the ER setting would be, fractures would be a great place to start. I guess osteomyelitis is another one, again, MSK applications. Can you, how much of the patient can you get in? Is it mainly head and extremity, or can you actually, I guess, depending on the patient's body width, is it possible to get a abdomen or pelvis exam in there?
So today is just head right now. We are working on extremity stuff, but today is just head. I think we'll have to probably have a different version of the scanner that does the more than just a head. But think of like even neuro things that you see in the ER scenario, so.
Absolutely. The neuro application, one of the applications would be quickly just, stroke if there's a positive diffusion images. Because oftentimes what the ER doctor is doing, we're getting a non-contrast brain and they're going straight to a CTA. And we just see, so many cases where you just can't see the infarct, even on the CTA with the post-contrast, there may not be as big enough of a blockage. So the angiogram is unremarkable, but then they do the MRI and then it's positive on the diffusion. So I think that's a huge area where they could, if they suspect a stroke, get them right in. That's probably what's happening already, right? This is the first application for you guys. Somebody comes in, they get right on the scanner, perhaps before even the physician, gets to see them. But I think that's probably the number one application of
just happened on Sunday, actually.
Yeah.
All the other brain scans were negative in the MRI, and a 39-year-old.
Yeah.
He had I think it was an
infarct. Yeah. It was on a 27-year-old.
Oh, a 27-year-old.
Yeah. It was a 27. Yeah, it was a lacunar infarct. Couldn't see it on anything because everything is normal. The brain matter is all normal. So I even go back in retrospect, looked at the CT, looked at the CTA, can't see it, but there it was on the diffusion images. So I think that'd probably be the number one application right there in the emergency room.
Yeah, the volume is pretty pretty significant for that kind of, pathology. And that's where, just imagine the 27-year-old, if you don't detect it earlier on, the lifestyle, it's a huge cost to the whole.
We've seen several patients over the years in their 20s, in their 30s with infarcts, and symptoms are very vague, like they're not your classic symptoms. And then you delve into the histories, and it's drug abuse or something else, cocaine abuse, something like that. And I call the ER doctor, and I'll be like, "Hey, this exam is positive for an acute infarct," and they're shocked. They're like, "Well, the guy is just confused, no focal symptoms." Well, here's the evidence. There it is. So I think that's where the Hyperfine could really, help clarify and, and provide rapid information right at the bedside.
We actually just had a recent interesting case where we ended up seeing it on MRI as well. And it was the leukomalacia.
Yeah, there's a periventricular leukomalacia case, and there were some areas of ischemia in there. You couldn't see it on the CT because it's all just dark, right? It was just all dark on the CT. So
and the patient had recent COVID, so it was very interesting.
Yeah, it was phenomenal. It was an interesting brain pattern. Yeah, I mean, probably somewhere there's some literature on it, but it seemed like a very interesting. But yeah, these are all applications I think for the Hyperfine for sure. So.
In your workflow, like maybe thinking over the next 3 years, like AI and sort of interpretation support, do you see that as a 5% contributor to sort of productivity, or is it a 15 or a 40% contributor? What are your thoughts over like the foreseeable future?
Yeah. So here are my thoughts on AI. So I went to the last RSNA, right? And I went to every single AI booth and I asked them, I said, in 30 seconds or less, tell me what it is your company does and how it can help me on a day-to-day basis. You want to know how many booths would actually give me a coherent 30-second answer? Take a wild guess. 0.
Yeah.
0. Nobody, I couldn't see it. Now, maybe I'm just not, as well versed in AI as you guys probably, but I didn't see anything practical that I could use on a day-to-day basis as a teleradiologist, right? I'm sure there's more there to it, right? In the background, like there's, AI involved in worklist sorting, and I know there's some lung applications and some breast applications, that sort of thing, but I just didn't find anything that would help me in terms of productivity. I think to the contrary, what we have to be careful about is just throwing more and more information at the radiologist to process. Like, unless it helps me to like pick up a temporal bone fracture or, that appendicitis where I just can't see anything because there's stool, or there's no contrast and unopacified bowel loops there. I don't see the application yet. I'm sure somebody other than a lot more smarter people than me out there, somebody does, and I'd be interested to learn about how that would help with productivity.
So when we go to sites like, standalone ERs and, again, acute settings where they may not have, or they're outsourcing radiology practices, they may not have, MR contracts and things like that. How do you feel about, providing interpretation service as part of this whole aspect of device in those acute scenarios?
We'd be happy to provide service. Are you asking about would we be?
I'm just wondering what your thought process is, like, turnaround times and SLAs if somebody had to ask for us. I mean, again, we're talking about openly here. Like, I'm just getting your thought process. That are you doing that for anybody else, or is there any kind of what do you think the demand would be, something like that?
I mean, I think demand would be really high. We haven't done it for anybody else yet, but I could just see tons of potential and tons of demand, for that type of thing. As it's probably going to follow an exponential curve, right? You'll get a few institutions here, and then like in a year and a half, they seem to be everywhere, right? Like, so it's like a multiplier effect. And then everybody wants it, and everybody expects it as the standard of care, and they'll start advertising. We have health systems like Hyperfine Portable MRI at the bedside immediately, and then patients look at that and say, I want that thing, right? So I just imagine it's just going to go, like that.
Chris, any input, thoughts?
One last question from me would be,
yeah.
If you were imagine a world where, let's just say, imaging volumes, devices get lighter, cheaper, faster, more one-click order type devices. Mm-hmm. If we go into that future and imaging volume doubles, triples, whatever it does, how your model and the efficiency, the extraordinary efficiency you've been able to create, how transferable is that? How scalable or impartable is that to others in the radiology community?
That's a great question. There is a learning curve to what we do, right? It's not intuitive. I initially thought when I designed the whole thing about 4.5 years ago, I thought, any radiologist could walk into this theater, see the scribe, see the workflow, and instantly get on there, right? And I've had some very, very smart teleradiologists in our theater, and we've sat them down in the chair and like, here, go at it, right? almost none of them have been able to just literally just jump in and go. So then I thought, okay, there is definitely a learning curve. And part of it is they have to learn to let go of control, which is the hardest thing, right? Because the natural attitude is that, you know, I'm going to choose the case off the work list. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do, but you got to let go of all that stuff, right? Let the scribes display the case, QC it, make sure all the recons are there, get the history for you, get the contrast dose, the radiation dose, get that all there. So the images are ready, stacked with the comparisons ready to go. And all you're doing is scrolling, zooming, and panning. So we actually train our radiologists in that. There's a learning curve. And what I tell every radiologist is expect a decrease in productivity in the first 2-3 weeks, like below your baseline. And then maybe at about week 4 of constantly doing this, you're meeting your baseline. And then you're going to start to get gains at about week 6, 7, 8, and 9. I'll tell you, we have one radiologist who, we won't tell you his name, but he's a pretty well-known guy. He's been using our scribes, and it was exactly that. I mean, within 6 weeks, he was up, productivity was up 50%. And he told me, he said, you know, he got his life back. He was able to do less shifts. He's making, you know, much more in terms of productivity. His quality is better. He's not getting the typos, the voice recognition errors, because you got 2, sometimes 3 humans actually looking at the report. They're checking for laterality. They're checking for, you know, are there any grammatical errors, all that stuff, all while the radiologist is still doing their interpretation. So this is very scalable. It's very transferable. It's very trainable, right? Like anything else in medicine and radiology, like we can train on this and get good. And it's a skill set. And once that skill set is there, developed, it's very hard to go back to the old model. We have yet to have any radiologist that's actually gone back to the, which is phenomenal, because not a single one has gone back to using a voice recognition after they use our scribes. It's like crack cocaine. Like they're on it, they can't get off it. And if they don't have their scribes, they're calling her frantically. I was like, where's my scribe? I was like, 5 months ago you were doing it the old way. What happened? Like you can't function at all. No, we can't function.
Or I want more scribes.
Or I want more scribes.
Yeah, because their downtime now is so much, because their scribes are doing all of that, you know, the other 80% or the other 60% that they were doing when they weren't doing image analysis. So they're like, I could be reading way more now. So
yeah. The other thing it opens up to is also for any teleradiologist, right? And I always tell all my teleradiologists, like, think of your practice not as a job. Think of it actually as a practice and an entrepreneurial endeavor. You're a processor of volume. Like you'll take all comers. It opens you up to multiple streams of teleradiology income. So you could have several clients all running at the same time and using your scribes to maximize all that efficiency. So there's a lot more that goes into the model that actually builds a very solid base of support for any individual teleradiologist working remotely.
So just one other comment on that is a lot of feedback that we received on our model from our radiologists, whether they're sitting in their own office by themselves reading or they're in their basement reading, is just their mental health has improved so much, because they're while they're virtually with, you know, their scribes, they're still having that relationship and that conversation, you know, and it's they feel like it's not just themselves in the images. So it's like they feel so much better in this model and concept.
This really addresses the isolation, because I mean, I worked as a teleradiologist for years for a big box company, and the isolation can be brutal. You know, you're in there 8, 10, 12 hours. I know radiologists who, believe it or not, do 12-hour shifts, you know, sometimes 15, 17, 18, 20 shifts a month. And the isolation is just brutal. It's just you in the basement with a dictaphone going at case after case. When we're in our environment, you've got scribes that actually hold you accountable. They keep you humored, they keep you moving. You know, whenever I want to start giving up, my scribes will tell me, hey, doc, we just got 5 more cases. Let's just get these in before we go, you know, on dinner break, or let's get this. They just put this MRI up. Let's just get this one done. So they're actually pushing me and motivating me to do better. You know?
Like your personal trainer.
Yes, very much so. Well, this has been great, guys. I appreciate your time, and I think we've covered a lot of topics. This has been really fun. I'm glad we learned more about Hyperfine and what you guys are doing, and we talked a little bit about our workflow and our model. And Khan, you know, we have more radiologists with more capacity. So if you've got more volume, please send it our way.
I would love to.
Well, thank you very much, guys, and
Thank you
have a
so
good day,
much.
okay? Thank you.
Thanks a ton.
Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers.